What is up, YouTube? This is Badass Mode of Prussia. I am back on Minecraft PS4 Legacy Console Edition. This is version 1.94, so Village and Pillage is updated. Now, this is actually going to be a multi-purpose video in that last week I posted a video where I kind of broke down some of my experimental findings and guesses and hypotheses as to how the new iron golem farms work and the spawning mechanics. Now, I wanted to make some corrections to that since I didn't want to feed anybody misinformation. Now, again, pretty much everything that I said in that video and pretty much everything about the mechanics I say in this video are largely speculation on my part based on different testing and experiments that I've performed. So don't take them as absolute fact or law. I cannot guarantee that these are true, but what I can do is tell you what I've found. So grain of salt, people. However, I don't want to feed anybody misinformation, so I have removed the previous video from public viewing on my channel. Now, the other purpose of this video, for those of you who are only interested in this, is I wanted to debut kind of my new iron farm design. Now, just to break down the specs so you know whether you're interested immediately or not, this is, I believe, a 29 blocks in this direction, 39 blocks in this direction, and from this top glass pane down to this bottom chest right here, I believe that is 15 blocks. So this is fairly large, but there is a very good reason as to why, and that is kind of dependent on the mechanics. Also, the setup may be a little strange to some of you. Now, in my personal opinion, the spawning platforms aren't really the part that kind of sucks about this. It's the water transportation collection system that kind of makes it look so bad. The platforms by themselves actually aren't that much different from the regular spawning platforms that you used to use for like the validated door farms in terms of size. It's like two of those stacked next to each other, essentially. I believe the old designs were like 16 by 16. Again, I said this is like 39 wide, so it's slightly larger than that. But in terms of the actual size of the platform, it's not that bad. In terms of the collection chamber, that's what really makes it look awful. And for the rates, I've performed a couple of different tests where I would essentially let it run for the posted amount of time. This is 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour, 30 minutes, 1 hour. So these different trials, I would just take the contents of this chest and move it to the other chest, which it corresponded to. So for those of you, again, interested in the rates to determine whether you actually care about this video or not, this was 1 hour, 32 ingots, 1 hour, 51 ingots, 1 hour, 43 ingots, 30 minutes, 26 ingots, 30 minutes, 20 ingots, and 1 hour, 36 ingots. So I would say probably if you're looking at the 51 and you get excited, or the 43, I would say the 51 is more of an outlier and you should probably not count on that at all. I would estimate somewhere between 30 to 40 as the average rate in 1 hour. Now, again, this one did have 20 in it, but again, it is a 30-minute interval, so 2 times 20. Now, again, for those of you who are interested in this part only, you just want to copy and paste the build and try it out in your world, go ahead and skip ahead further into the video. I'm not sure what the time marker is. This is one continuous shot, and I don't edit my videos because I'm very much an amateur YouTuber. Now, if that's all that interests you, feel free to skip ahead to the next part where you see this. This won't be reappearing until I'm focusing on this again. For those of you interested in actually learning the mechanics about this, I'm going to start way over here and explain a bunch of stuff that's probably going to seem disconnected until I get to my actual farm design. Now, excuse me. Also, I may cough or clear my throat during this video. Sorry, I am kind of mildly sick. Now, I said before in the last video that the Java and Bedrock rules for iron golem spawning and village mechanics are fairly well defined. Again, it's not the same for PS4. PS4, they've largely been silent. I've been scouring Reddit, YouTube, all sorts of different internet sources and forums, and I have found pretty much nothing on actual iron golem farm mechanics. Now, people have made some designs, the questionable in size or number of ingots per hour. I wouldn't consider myself in that category. The limitation on farms seems to be that to get like even a modest rate, it needs to be large in order to capture the spawning areas, and I'll get to that when I get over into that farm. For now, personally, I've been using, for a long time now, the official Minecraft wiki page for the Legacy Console Edition of PS4, and up until now it's been dead on accurate, but unfortunately, even though the page has been updated to reflect the Village and Pillage update, it still says that it is 21 valid doors actually are what, and 10 villagers are the minimum requirement to spawn golems. However, if you take this directly from their tutorial pages, they say this should produce 30 to 40 iron per hour, and clearly after 6 hours it produced 0 golems. So no surprises there, validated doors no longer work. But the actual structure of this and sort of the mechanics of the validated door farms are useful in explaining certain aspects of this farm over here. Now, ignoring kind of this top tower, this was a bad idea on my part that just flat out didn't work. But in a previous concept world, I kind of mimicked the design that you see on these first 2 levels, right? Where I figured the one thing that we really know about PS4 with like a great deal of accuracy is that it is a 16 by 16 by 6 spawning region for the golems. The question is it spawning centered on the bed, or is it spawning centered on the villager? So as of now, that's the question, and that's one of the things that I tend to tackle in this video. Well, before I actually had determined what I believe to be the truth about that, I said, well, if it's either the villager or the bed, well, why don't I just localize the villager and the bed to the same spot, so that pretty much the center of my village corresponds to more or less 1 or 2 blocks outside the range away from the bed. I.e., if this is the bed and the center of the golem spawning area, not the village, sorry, the center of the golem spawning area is 8 blocks in either direction to form a 16 by 16 by 6 centered on this, the head, the pillow end of the bed specifically. That would give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in all directions, and then just fill out the square and you'll overestimate the corners. For those of you who are wondering, it is essentially an 8-block radius around the pillow end of the bed, and for those of you that don't like math, if you were to have a block, a single block, an 8-block radius in the diagonal direction, that would be, if it's 1 block length this way and 1 block length this way, by the Pythagorean theorem, it's the square root of 2 along the diagonal, which is like ever so slightly short, I believe, of 1.4. So if you divide 8 by 1.4, you get 5 something, I think. So it's 6 blocks in the diagonal direction, corresponds to like a slight overestimate of the maximum spawning range of your golems centered around this bed. So filling out the corners is just, it's easier. And water, if you're using water transportation systems, it's also, again, much easier. That being said, the idea was if it's centered around either the villager or the bed, and that each villager is capable of producing a golem, in a previous concept world, I figured, well, why don't I just make a hotel design where it mimics this, where it's just 1 bed at the center of these things. Let me get a bed out just for shits and gigs. If I were to put a bed here, in the center of my village, it would be 1 block below, but, and my villager is in here, then more or less the villager would spawn a golem, it would go on this one. Well, what about this guy? If I stack another one on top, well, this villager should spawn up here. Well, what if I stack another one on top? And it just keeps going. So the original design was I had 10 of these to maximize the spawning platforms for the golems. The problem is, something really weird happened that I didn't expect. When I stacked, I actually did 11 of these just to make it a geometric center at one point, but the minimum required was 10 villagers and 21 beds. So I took 10 of these booths and spawning platforms and stacked them on top of one another, which was really, really big, as you'd imagine. But I wanted to see if it would work, just for a testing of a design, like just for a concept. The weirdest thing happened. Now, when you come over here, and we used to use the validated door system, you'll see I have 10 doors on each of the 4 sides symmetrically, right? Which would mean that the village center within this horizontal plane, meaning when I say horizontal plane, I mean like this entire layer of blocks right here. Within this plane, the village center would be, since this is an even number of blocks, at the northwest corner, I believe, so it would be, the clouds are moving this direction, which is west, so it would be this block right here within the plane would be the village center, whereas because the doors are right here, I think it was like right there was the village center. So this would be the center of my village overall, I think, or like 1 block above that, because of the validated doors. That does not work the same way, and I say the same way, even though most people are probably questioning that already, with beds. If I were to align my beds in a symmetric configuration surrounding like this on all four sides all the way around, that will not produce a geometric center of my iron golem spawning right here. It will not produce a spawning center right here. No, no, no. But the weirdest thing happened when I tested this hotel design, and I'm actually using it to my advantage in the new farm, so it does work pretty well. When I had 10 of these stacked on top of one another, let's say I did 11 also, so let's just use the example of 11. If I have 11 of these little hotel booths stacked on top of one another with their individual spawning platforms, the idea was that each villager will spawn golems and cats on their own platform. That is not what happened. Villagers and cats and golems did in fact spawn, but they only spawned on the central level. So I believe in this design I had 2 below and I had 2 above, and then I had the rest of my stuff in here. And they didn't quite work out so well because I noticed there needs to be a certain symmetry to the configuration. But again, these only spawned when I did the hotels on the central level. So I had 11 of these stacked on top of one another, and I would get cats and golems only spawning on the 5th level. That kind of implies that there is a vertical center to the golem spawning area and the cat spawning area from your configuration of beds. But again, the horizontal configuration within this plane on this layer makes no difference whatsoever, except for the fact that if it spawns around the bed, if I put my beds way over on the outer perimeter instead of the center, then not only can I spawn all the way to the center, but I can also spawn behind the bed all the way out as well, which again was why everything was kind of a central pattern. But I'd be able to spawn out to here as well, so I'd have to increase the size of my platforms. Now, this design was a total failure, right? It was very inefficient, but it comes with a lot of information. Not only do we have the vertical center, but let's kind of talk about the way that the spawning check works. Now, and a lot of you have seen kind of the Java and Bedrock editions. They've come out with plenty of farms that work. Now, I'll start with the Java edition. The rules are not identical. Now, PS4 does use some of Bedrock's code, I believe, but it does not obey the Bedrock rules, and Bedrock, Java, and Legacy Console are all different from one another. So those of you who are trying the Fear farms, they will not work on PS4, and I don't believe they work on Bedrock either. Now, when I say Fear farm, I mean in Java edition, if you have 3 different villagers which all see the same mob, the same zombie or whatever, they have a chance, a very high chance, albeit, to spawn an iron golem. Now, that does not work on PS4. You can try it in any configuration you want. The villagers do not react the same way to mobs. It just does not work. Also, the key difference between the 3 versions is in Java, and I think maybe even in Bedrock, I don't have either of those editions, so I can't say for certain. If I were to contain all of my beds and villagers some magical how, this isn't actually physically possible, but let's pretend like all of my villagers and beds are somehow contained in here, and it meets the requirement. Now, for all of my beds and villagers to be here, in fact, I'm just going to make these pumpkins to distinguish them. Let's say I have my villagers and beds here, so this is the center of my 16 by 16 by 6 region. But let's say randomly, like out here, I decide to make a 4 by 4 platform. That was weird. So I have my little 4 by 4, I can't count, platform. Now, if this is where my villager's center, the spawning center is, this flies within the center, right? I could also make a platform like up here and it would still be in the center. It doesn't matter. But let's say I've built this way, ignore all the stuff behind me, pretend like it's not there for the moment. You can see this is isolated. Like, there are no other blocks where a golem can spawn except on this layer. So when in Java edition, in all the farms that you see that have very high efficiency golem spawning, right? What you're seeing is the villager says, and this is, again, I don't own the edition, so this may not be exactly true, but what appears to happen is the villager will say, okay, well, I want to spawn a golem. Well, the only place around here that a golem could spawn on top of, the only place within my 16 by 16 by 6 region is this little spawning platform right here. So I guess I'll just put the golem here. So it'll spawn a golem on this platform, right? And that'll be the end of it. It'll spawn the golem, and you'll carry him away and kill him and trap all the iron in some chest, exactly like you normally would. But that's the thing. Every time they want to spawn a golem, since this is the only place they can spawn, that's where they'll spawn. that being said, on the PS4 edition, this is, again, my hypothesis as to why the Iron Golem rates are so low. Now, on the PS4 edition, an Iron Golem requires 3 blocks of empty space to spawn in. They take up 3 high blocks. Now, this is just the height. They have a volume requirement, but the main thing that we need to focus on is the height. So again, an Iron Golem can exist within a 3 block space. So an Iron Golem couldn't jump in this space, right? They'd be limited to like the slightest vertical movement because they're exactly 3 blocks tall. But they could still move around within the horizontal plane of this spawning platform. Now the weird thing is, Iron Golems require 3 vertical blocks to move around, but they require 3.5 blocks in order to spawn. So they actually need this little extra half block to spawn within these platforms. Now, the main difference that, again, kills Iron Golem farms is to have 2 platforms where an Iron Golem can fit. Like, if they need 3 vertical spaces to fit, but they need 3.5 spaces to spawn, but it's only a 16 by 16 by 6 region, that means, let's say, if my bed is the center of my village, not my village, but my spawning region. I need an opaque block, right? So let's say this is the center of my spawning region. My 16 by 6 region is centered on the pillow end of this bed, and it's not centered on the top of the bed. It is centered on this little gap between here. So the 16 by 6 region accounts for this little horizontal platform. The 6 part is the vertical height, and since it's centered, that means this little line between the feet of the bed and the block that the bed is standing on the pillow end, that is the vertical center of your spawning region, right? Whereas the pillow end of the bed represents the horizontal center of your spawning region. So the 16 by 6 is centered around the center of this, the pillow end of the bed, whereas the 6 part is centered around here. So it's 3 above this and 3 below this little gap. So just to demonstrate with iron blocks, this little line right here that I'm pointing at, like this line between the 2 blocks, that's where the center of that is. So an Iron Golem can realistically spawn on the top of this block, or on the top of this block, or on the top of this block, or on the top of this block. It can also spawn likewise on top of that, on top of that, on top of that, or on top of that, not the bottom, specifically on the top. So that's the lowest height that it can spawn on, and that's the maximum height that it can spawn on top of, right? So a golem can be on there, and a golem can be on there. Now, this is where the restriction part comes in that kills Iron Golem spawning rates. Since they require 3.5 spaces, right, we can only fit 2 platforms, right? A golem can spawn in here within range, and then another golem can spawn in here within range, but there's no other configuration where I can have more than 1 platform and still spawn golems on both, right? This is the only way that I can have 2 platforms to spawn on. It's the same way that we used to do in the validated door system. Herein lies the problem that kills rates. If my bed is right here, then I can spawn, it would need to be 1 lower. In fact, I'll use this as the bottom platform, and this will be the top platform. See, my bed is indented 1 block below the spawning surface on top, and then 3 blocks below, and you'll notice since these are upper half slabs, things can spawn on top of them, but it also leaves this extra half block gap, so then 3 blocks below that, I can spawn golems on this platform. So golems can fit and spawn on both of these platforms. They can walk around and spawn because of the 3.5 block height. Now the issue is, if this bed marks the center of my 16 by 6 region, then if I go way over here, a golem can spawn anywhere on this surface, right? And it can spawn anywhere on this surface. But what happens if my golem says, okay, my villager says, I want to spawn a golem right here? Well, it does. It can stand here. It has enough vertical height to stand here. What if it says, okay, well, I want to spawn one here? It can stand here. It has enough space to spawn. It can walk around. That's good. What if it wants to spawn a golem right, let's say, here? Like, well, okay, well, that's outside of the spawn range, so it can't. Obviously, it won't even choose that as a viable region. But this is inside the spawn range. Can it spawn here? Can it spawn on top of this block? No, it doesn't have the space to do it. Can it spawn on top of this block? Well, it has nothing above it, so yeah, sure, it can spawn, can't it? No, because this is an air block. This is just a demonstration of where it would be standing. An Iron Golem can't spawn in midair. So the problem is, when it goes to perform a check, I believe every 6 minutes is the rough average estimate of time that it takes for a chance to spawn a golem, and each time that it tries to spawn a golem, the villager will try 10 different times to spawn the golem. The problem is, if you only have 2 surfaces, but from this bottom surface, well, the bottom of this surface right here, like, this is good, but all of these up to here are all spawnable heights, then you're missing the vast majority of these. So when it performs a golem spawn check and it sees, okay, well, I can't spawn here, I can't spawn here, I can't spawn here, I can't spawn here, if it goes through that 10 times, it fails the spawn check and it won't spawn a golem at all. You'll have to wait at least another 6 minutes on average to have another chance to spawn a golem, and even then it could fail, and then you'd be 12 minutes and you'd have to wait another 6, and it just goes on forever until they choose to say, okay, well, this one actually works, I'll spawn it here, and then it's again another 6 minutes or so. So that's predominantly what seems to be killing off iron golem rates. But the big takeaway from this is that the 2 platforms need to be spaced, but they don't have a horizontal center, but they do have a vertical center, and that vertical center of the spawning region is vital to my farm design. Now we're going to move over to here where I tested my next concept. So you'll see I have my beds marked off to the side. Originally this design, before I broke it down just because of possible proximity to another village, these are all 128 blocks away from another, with exception of those 2 because those are doors and those are beds. Now, the point of this farm was, originally I had the bed on the upper shelf just because the cats will only then spawn on the upper shelf and not the bottom shelf. If I were to move my beds down to, please move, if I were to move my beds down to this level, one below the top spawning platform, cats will spawn on both the top and the bottom, as well as golems. Cats can spawn in the exact same regions that golems can spawn, so they are a good indicator of the region a golem can spawn in or will spawn in on your platforms. So if cats are only up top, then golems will only spawn on top. So let's say I only use the top layer for simplicity. Let me get out a block. I already had one in my inventory, I just noticed that. So I have 7 beds on this side. I come over here. Likewise, I have 7 beds right here, and then I have 7 beds right here. That's 21 beds is the minimum requirement for a golem to be able to spawn within a village, as well as 10 villagers. Now you see I have a little villager pod where they just sit in here. They can't move around. They're localized to this 1 by 1 by 2 space. Now you'll see he just had little green particles pop over his head because if I put another villager in here, you'll see it again. He's claiming this bed even though he cannot physically get to this bed, and that is a very important detail. Excuse me. Now you'll notice that sorry again. You'll notice that this will be from the villager's central location 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 blocks in both directions, or in all 4 cardinal directions, right? So if the golems are spawning centered on the villagers, since my villagers are confined to this 1 block area, if they're within a 16 by 6, they should have to spawn within this central region. But if my beds are on the side, outside of this 8 block radius, then sure, my beds could spawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 up to here on this side, but they could also spawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on this side. Now, I kind of cut it off because it doesn't matter. If any golems at all spawn within these side pockets, then it must be centered on the beds, or at least the beds are the predominant mechanic involved in iron golem spawning. That is not to say that the villagers in this could have no effect whatsoever. It's just to say that the predominant effect comes from the location of the beds. Now, I let this run for maybe about 3 or 4 hours, I would like to say. You'll notice each of these torches in each of these booths represents a golem that spawned in there. So 11 golems, 11 torches means 11 golems spawned in this central region, but 2 golems spawned in this pocket, right? 1 golem spawned in this pocket, and 1 golem spawned in this pocket, which very much implies that the golems are centered around the head posts of the beds, the pillow ends, right? Now, again, that doesn't necessarily disqualify the necessity of the position of my villagers relative to my spawn point, but notice that they're in the center and they're standing on this block, which is 1 below the top layer. So I figured, okay, well, what happens if I move my villagers around? Why are you not taking damage? Anyway, what happens if I move my villagers around but leave my beds in the same location. So I came over here and I replicated the design. Again, I deleted the beds just in case they overlapped, even though they shouldn't, with another village. 7 beds here, 7 beds here, 7 beds on this side, symmetric about them, 21 beds total, and now my villagers are standing level with this surface. It made no difference, right? My golems spawned, it was actually 6, I deleted a block to put in the glowstone, but it spawned 6 golems over the course of like 2 or 3 hours, which is bad, but I mean, I was using the minimum requirements and the minimum space and the minimum number of spawning platforms, so that's kind of as you would expect. So general consensus is maybe the villager's position does matter, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't. It's predominantly golems are centered on the beds as well as cats, and cats are a good indicator of where golems will spawn. Now, in my last video, I was following bedrock rules. I was playing by bedrock rules, and when I say that, I mean that in order for villagers in bedrock to spawn golems, I believe it's still 21 beds and 10 villagers as a minimum. However, villagers have to be able to physically access the beds and sleep in them, and they also have to be physically able to access workstations and work. Then they must gossip, and then they create golems. That doesn't even appear to be necessary, but there is kind of a weird mechanic surrounding it, and I'll explain that when I get to that farm over there in just a second. Now again, what is missing from this? Right? These villagers can't reach the beds, but they still validate the beds. They still take possession of the beds over time, right? So they can't sleep in them, but they can see them. And allegedly, I believe it's a 40-block radius in which a villager can register a bed. I'm not sure if that applies to a workstation as well, but it is a very significant range, and you can put them at the perimeter of your farm, or really wherever you want within reason, and it'll still validate the farm. Now, the villagers need to register the beds, at least 10 villagers and at least 21 beds, but that means 10 of the villagers need to claim 10 of the beds. It does not matter which of the 10 beds, but the beds which are claimed may or may not contribute to the spawning area. That is the one thing I'm not able to test. With 21 beds, well, I suppose I could test it, but it'd be very tedious and I just didn't feel like doing it. I do have a test in mind that I could do. As far as I can tell, it's registered beds that actually spawn golems, not just blank beds that happen to be within the village. But if you come over here, I decided, well, what would happen if I produced the exact same setup as over there, but I required them to have workstations? But now I put my workstations, you can see my beds were aligned the same, the pockets on the side were the same, but when I aligned my workstations, I put them right here so that there were 10 workstations, right? Right? 10 workstations over here. That kind of bothers me. Now, if I put my villagers in here, this is the same setup as over there, just with workstations added in. Now you'll see, he will register both a bed and a workstation. Right? He just became a farmer. He registered that that composter right here, and he registered one of the beds over here. I didn't see which one. So he can in fact register this. But now, if you have 10 villagers and 21 beds and 10 workstations, that should technically meet the minimum requirement to produce to produce iron golems. It doesn't, right? So the weird thing surrounding these mechanics is, in these farms, you can see if they don't have access to the beds and there are no workstations, they still produce golems centered on the beds. Whereas over here, when I had workstations that the villagers could link themselves to, they would not spawn golems unless they can perform the bedrock mechanic exactly, right? If you include workstations, your villagers will attach themselves to the workstations, but the only way in this particular setup with workstations involved that a villager can produce a golem is if they were to sleep, work at their station, and gossip with other villagers. So they would need to have physical access to sleep in these beds and to physically access their workstations, or else they will not produce golems at all. So it's either you play by bedrock rules and make your life that much more complicated, or you don't bother with the workstations whatsoever and you keep them from accessing the beds. Both work, but for some reason, both work. It's either bedrock rules or nothing. So now we actually get on to the farm that I built. Now, again, I don't even remember if I showed these rates yet. The rates are somewhat modest. I believe I did, right? 32 in an hour, 51 in an hour, 43 in an hour, 26 in 30 minutes, 20 in 30 minutes, and 36 in an hour. So roughly 30 to 40 on average. This has been running for quite some time, actually. So again, it's not like, oh, there's one. It's not like a definite guaranteed rate. It is still largely up to chance due to the spawning check. Now, okay, so I'll explain kind of the position of my beds and why I've chosen certain materials and what can be replaced with other materials. Now, if you want an honest-to-God block by block tutorial on how to build this, if you comment or like 1 or 2 people want it to, like, it doesn't really matter to me how many people want it. If somebody wants a block by block tutorial, I can do it, but ask at your own risk, because beware, I'm an amateur YouTuber. I don't have access to a lot of editing tools, so if I do a tutorial, this will have to be one continuous shot, right? And I don't know if you understand how long it takes even in a creative world to build this thing. It'll be like an hour or 2 long video, which is just impractical. So like I can take out chunks and like edit and clip out chunks, but I have to do for the most part one continuous shot. So again, ask at your own risk. I hope you're really patient if you do ask. Now, this isn't a particularly hard design to come up with. Like, you'll see just some like little details. If I put some glass right here to stop the flow of water, you'll notice I have little stone slabs and then I have little mossy slabs. The moss slabs correspond to actual locations within the spawning range of the bed, whereas the stone slabs on the side are just one little extra block that I added just so that my golems won't get stuck in walls and suffocate. Again, if I could technically put like glass blocks here or something, and nothing would spawn on top of them, but golems could then spawn on this block right here, and because of the volume of a golem, they would be partially encased in this block, and they would suffocate and take damage, possibly die, and possibly not fall through my farm. And that would kind of defeat the purpose of this whole farm if any golem spawning on the edge would suffocate and die. Now, you can remedy that by, if you were to place just this one block here and then glass blocks on the outside, it should be okay. However, the way I built my farm, you'll notice if it's 8 blocks within range of the pillow, right, this is within 8 blocks, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then this one little extra stone on the end. But if you go from the end block, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So this isn't actually the full. If I wanted to get the full range, I would just extend this entire layer by 2 on the outside and then produce another extra block on the outside. Or actually, you wouldn't even need to do this. It would be add 2 more slabs, 2 more rows of slabs on the outer edges on the long sides, and then just add your glass panes in on the side. And again, the glass pane just adds a little half block of empty space so that if your golem can spawn on this block, they won't suffocate and they won't get stuck on the glass. Whereas again, if you had a glass block right here, they could suffocate and they could get stuck partially within this block, so it creates problems. This is already like 39 or so wide, I think, so I didn't really see the point of saying, okay, well, it's only like, again, I believe I mentioned earlier Pythagoras theorem, it's 6 blocks diagonal, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that's already encased in this. So adding on this little extra like layer of like 2 blocks right here just to accommodate this little possibility of spawning right here didn't really seem particularly necessary or reasonable because it would mess with my water source blocks. As you'll notice, I've already divided this in half along the length of these beds to make the water sources work better. This was the configuration that I found sacrificed the fewest number of spawnable locations for golems, right? So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 on the other side. So out of this entire upper layer, only 8 blocks of spawnable locations have been removed, of course minus the beds. The beds are absolutely necessary, and this is the smallest, narrowest profile that you can have that still works. Again, you could technically replace these with glass blocks, and then this would be a narrow chamber, and you would have this empty space right here, but again, your golems could potentially suffocate on the inside, so glass panes it is. So this is unfortunately necessary to have this 3 by whatever length channel dug out. So golems could technically spawn within here, which is why there's empty space and half slabs and glass blocks instead of like opaque blocks and upper half slabs. So nothing can spawn in there based on the way I've built it. However, that is unfortunately space that golems will not be able to spawn in where they should be able to spawn in. So that has to be a thing. That has to impact your farm to some extent. Now, on the lower level, again, I have pretty much the exact same setup, but you'll notice, again, remember when I said that golems require a 3-block high gap? Notice that the magma block takes up that little half block of extra space I need. So it's 3 blocks high, so since a golem won't jump up and down in the water, a golem can pass right under these blocks no problem. But this particular block is in a location where a golem does not have enough space to spawn. So really, a golem, I'm sacrificing 8 spaces. On the top, again, a golem can spawn on top of these because they are full blocks. They are opaque, full blocks. So a golem can spawn on them, but down here, because of the symmetry, because it goes 1/2 block below the upper level, a golem could not spawn directly under this, and a golem could not spawn directly under this. Likewise for all of the magma blocks, but only on the lower level. Oh, there's one. So again, this one only forgoes 8 blocks of space, which could otherwise spawn golems, excluding the beds area, right? And this one excludes 16. So you're missing 32 blocks only of spawnable locations, excluding the necessary space for the beds, right? So again, the water configuration is a little weird, and some of you may wonder why I have these magma blocks in a particularly weird area. And I will show that. I really don't want to do this because it's kind of annoying to rebuild it. But for demonstration purposes, if I were to take replace these 4 with glass blocks for right now, because they're made out of half slabs, it'll kind of be difficult later. It'll waterlog the block and I'll have to go through and replace it later. Now, you'll notice right now, I don't have any real stagnant blocks except for where my magma is, right? These are stagnant blocks right here, source blocks. So they will actually pull my cats and stuff into them. I actually passed right over that one. But you'll notice I have a stagnant block where I can stand still and I'm totally unaffected by the water. But you'll notice my cat is not, right? My cat is forced to hop up and down on this as the magma block sucks him in and kills off the cats. Now, someone, I forgot, I don't know if I've mentioned the cat cap yet. Now, one of the mechanics that does apply to PS4 is that each 4 beds spawns 1 cat. So for every 4 beds, you have the potential to spawn 1 cat in your village. Now, if I have 8 beds, I can spawn 2 cats. 12 beds, 3 cats. But if I have 13 beds, I can still only spawn 3 cats, right? The issue is when you reach 40 beds, you can have up to 10 cats, and the cat cap is defined as 10 cats within a village. Now, once you reach 10 cats within a village, it's called the cat cap because no more cats can spawn regardless if you have more than 40 beds. 10 cats at maximum can spawn within a village. The issue with that is that once you have 10 cats and you reach the cap, you can no longer spawn iron golems either. Now, the tricky part, I was aware of the cat cap, and since I'm only using 24 beds here, I've never used 40. You could use 40, however, I believe the limit on PS4 for villagers in one world is 50 villagers at a time. So it's kind of not a great restriction if you want to use villagers anywhere else within your survival world or something. So I limited myself to 24, but also because of the size of the actual farm. It's already 39 wide, so why make it wider or taller? Now, sorry, I kind of blanked out there for a second. Again, the cat cap will stop spawning villagers, but as I was posting on a Reddit community, somebody pointed out something that I wasn't aware of. Apparently, once you reach the cat cap, the only way to reduce the number of the cats counted in the cap is not to kill cats anywhere, but you have to kill a cat within the actual line of sight of a villager, which is what these magma blocks are doing, right? The villager can see these cats dying on the magma blocks, but furthermore, each cat that dies on the magma block, which is actually a fairly significant amount, leaves its string behind so that you don't get an ungodly amount of string in your chamber instead of iron. Like, you can see this has been running for a while. This is actually still a substantial amount of string, but it would be way, way more than normal. So like you can see, like on average 2 stacks of strings over like maybe 30 minutes, 2 stacks of strings an hour, so it varies, but it does definitely significantly reduce the amount of string produced in your iron farm, so it's not a string farm. And furthermore, I mean, cat cap, right? It's not an issue for me, but I figure it couldn't hurt anyway. Also, again, with the water configuration, you'll see everything is moving water, flowing water towards this hole, except for these 2 stagnant blocks where I've placed my magma. Now, I've explained the significance of the magma, but why are my water sources confined the way they are? Why are they split up this way? They're split this way just because, again, it takes the minimum amount of space. However, what happens if I put a source block right here? Right? These 4 blocks become stagnant, right? So on this side, you'll see only these 2 blocks are stagnant, and yet cats will get stuck, but if I were to produce an iron golem will sail right past, and I'll show that in a second. But currently, the water configuration is all of these blocks right here. So this block all the way over here, up to this block right here. We are discounting this corner. This block right here does not get a water source. All of the blocks between here to this other corner, between here to here, along this glass wall, they get source blocks, right? All of these are source blocks. And then in this corner right here, 1, 2, 3, 4 source blocks along this pivot, this little indent, and then 1 single source block in this corner, and that will produce this water flow with this stagnant block here and stagnant block here. The magma blocks are just to kind of help out and make use of the stagnant water. Now again, if I were to place another water block on this corner right here, this would become a stagnant water source where my golems and my cats can get stuck. And if I have 20 villagers, I can spawn up to 2 golems at any given time within this spawner. So if 2 golems at any given time get stuck within these stagnant blocks and choose not to move out, my iron golem farm will pause itself. It will not produce any more villagers, right? So instead, the reason I wouldn't do this is because I have to actually go back and fix it, and it's semi-annoying. You can see if I deleted this source block, remove the source blocks created, and then I put these back, it goes back to normal. Stagnant block here, stagnant block here, everything else is flowing. There are no dead zones where the currents run into one another and cause it to stop. So this configuration works, and after I replace this, I'll show you that the iron golems can sail right past it. So my initial concern was, okay, well, if I have, I need an iron block, and then I need... Now you'll see if I spawn a cat, falls onto the magma block if I spawn it right there. If I spawn a cat here, falls onto the magma block. Right, spawn a cat here. So the beauty of this is they all kind of push either towards the magma block or straight off the side. Now again, I can even spawn a cat over here and it'll push it over this way first and then into the magma block and then out, right? And then again, obviously, if I spawn a cat in the middle, it'll just fall straight off. Now, that was because 2 cats are on the same block, one pushed the other off. That can also happen. My primary concern wasn't cats, since I'm not dealing with a cat cap. 24 beds, I can only spawn, what, 6 cats, right, at a time? So, if I were to spawn an iron golem, however, what happens when they hit the block? If I just nudge him off the slightest bit, you'll see he'll take damage, but he'll slide straight over top of that. And another iron golem actually just spawned. He'll slide straight over top of both of these magma blocks, and he'll take very, very negligible damage. So it won't particularly matter to the golem, but it will matter to the cats. So it's selective, and that's extremely important. Now, the heart of this farm is really what's important. You don't really need much of a tutorial for most of you, I'm guessing, if you're looking these up. Maybe you copy and paste, but for the most people who build their own iron farms or really just play Minecraft in general, the actual physical structure of the iron farm is not the part that makes it like special. right? It's just a spawning platform. Now you need to know the mechanics to know how big to make the spawning platform and where you need to put your two different levels. But outside of that, the thing that makes this farm kind of my own unique design is that the arrangement of beds and the location of the villagers. Now you can see I have my villagers in a central chamber, and I have on each of my 4 sides, you'll notice I have an actual glass block here, a glass block there, and a glass block there, but everywhere else I have glass panes, right? Now this is kind of an important detail. The glass panes allow golems to pass by and spawn without suffocating, whereas this block kind of causes a little bit of an issue in that regard, but it's negligible effect. Now, my villagers, because of these side blocks and these side blocks, are localized to a 1-block region, and then this is a lower half slab, meaning that nothing can spawn on top of it. So it won't have any mobs that spawn in here, and they are standing, if you can see, on top of another glass block, and since it's a transparent block, no mobs can spawn on top of that either. So there's no way for mobs to spawn inside of here, and if you're really worried about that, you can always just close it off with some glass or some lower half slabs if you want. But these guys are perfectly safe as long as I don't get like aerially bombarded by mobs or something, and even then they can fall on top of here, but they can't reach my villagers. So there's no real way for a mob to hurt my villagers. And if you're wondering why I have exactly 24 beds and exactly 24 villagers, it's because of the entity cramming limit. Right? Now I have chosen to localize my villagers into a 1-block wide space, right? It is a 1-by-1 space. Now the limit on mobs that you can have or entities that you can have in a 1-by-1 space is 24. If I were to go to 25 villagers in this pod, they would actually kill each other and suffocate because of entity cramming. So this just avoids entity cramming. Realistically, if I were to take these 4 glass blocks that you see holding my villagers in place and just replace them with glass panes, it would actually kind of make more sense just based on the way the design is. Like, you could have just this, right? And you could also extend it and create more villagers. Because of that extra half-block space on each side, you can have way more than 24 villagers in here, and it shouldn't cause cramming. And cramming is still possible, assuming that all of the villagers choose to walk to like one corner of the box or something, in which case cramming will still happen. So this just absolutely prevents cramming while having the maximum number of villagers. Now, the minimum number of villagers is 10 villagers and 21 beds, and those 10 villagers have to be able to claim 10 of those 21 beds in order to spawn golems. That is the minimum requirement. Now, when I was over here telling you about this like kind of vertical height to the village, this is what the alignment of my beds is exploiting, right? So you'll notice when you're doing a normal iron golem spawner with beds, you would have your beds 1 level below the upper spawning surface, right? So spawning surface. So if this is an upper half block, upper half slab where I can spawn my golems, then my beds would be right here, so that if my bed is located on these 2 blocks, then it spawns on the upper surface and the lower surface, 3 blocks below. Now, you'll notice I have beds 1 layer above and 1 layer below that. That is the vertical center, is this line right here where my beds would normally be. So because of the configuration of my beds, if I break this real quick, you can see the vertical center of my configuration of beds is along the line of where I would normally put my beds. That is what makes this design function at all. If you were to arrange these beds in a different way, but keep these platforms where they are, let's say if I were to take this bottom layer of beds and move them to one above this current top layer of beds, right? That would create a vertical center right here on this platform, and they would only spawn on the top, not the bottom, right? So the vertical center of a village is very important in this regard. Now, the other thing that's incredibly important is, remember when I said earlier that, again, this is a hypothesis, but the vertical arrangement of beds, the location in which golems can spawn, if I have 21 beds but only 10 villagers, so that only 10 of my beds are claimed, that would mean that my golems aren't going to spawn around any of the 21 beds. they're going to spawn around the 10 of those 21 beds which have been claimed by the villagers. So to make this design work, the reason why you have to have the exact same number of beds as you do villagers, and it has to be a symmetric design, at least vertically, right? Horizontal symmetry is just kind of, it may or may not have an effect on your farm. Predominantly just like if I were to take like 4 on this side and then just keep 3 and like delete this like column of beds right here, it would kind of just shut off part of this end of my farm, but everything would still work, and the vertical center should still technically be right here along this middle line of beds. But again, if I wanted to add another bed or another layer, I can't just add one bed here and then add one villager. I would have to add a bed here, and then go on the bottom and add a bed below that one, and a bed below that, and then add 4 villagers. So the minimum number of villagers that you could add to this is 4. You could not add 3, 2, or 1. You'd have to add multiples of 4, right? So that's kind of the weird trick to this. Now, again, whatever your configuration, if you want to play around with this, the only way to get it to work is if your villagers match the exact number of beds. So that's really the crucial detail. But outside of that, this is, I mean, pretty much a straightforward farm in terms of the actual physical layout of the blocks. It's predominantly just the same way you would do the surfaces of the other farms. You're just changing the size of the surfaces. Like for a validated door farm, you would still have these 2 surfaces aligned exactly the same way as you would currently, but your bed location would be more important. So the beds are what make the farm now. Now villagers, again, now as far as I can tell and from all of my experiments, the villagers don't actually matter where they are in this farm so long as they're within 40 blocks of every bed. Not the bed that they're claiming. Technically the bed they're claiming would work, but since it's really hard to actually force them to claim a particular bed, because they can at any given point relinquish a claim to a bed and try to claim another, it's easiest to just, you know, do it this way. Keep them at the center just in case, so that they can, as like for certain, reach every single bed within the village, regardless if they want to claim it or not. Now, as for getting the villagers in here, my recommendation as a 1x1 channel, it makes it very convenient to make it a 1x1 channel instead of using glass panes, using glass blocks to confine them, because before you would actually create, you could like create the shell of this entire thing, and I would actually recommend putting the beds in first and then putting your villagers in. So let's say you have your spawning platform set up, you have your kill chamber or your collection chamber set up, you have your beds set up, and now you have your villager pod set up. So what you would do is, let's say I would create like a block like maybe right here and encase them in a 4x4 tube, right? Or not 4x4, or like a tube with like a block on each of the 4 sides, right? And then I would add a water source block like right here, or actually one below, so that your villagers don't suffocate, and they would bounce up like up and down right between here and these 2 layers on top of my source block, and I would just put like a soul sand block below. Now, again, before you put in the lava trap and the kill trap down here, you could just create, like, put a sand block here, create your little water tunnel, and then put a source block up here. The villagers will shoot up and they'll bounce up. And then once you have all 24 villagers in, if I can make my way back up, you would just go over here. It actually would have made more sense for me to go 1 layer below. You would come back in here, you would delete this block, you would put a block underneath of them, see what they're standing on. I would put a block here, and then I would take an empty bucket and I would scoop up the water source that's pushing them past that block, right? And then they would just fall into place. Then once they fall into place, you can just come up here and put a lower half slab so that nothing spawns on, or you can put a glass block. I know that wasn't glass, but imagine it was. A glass block there would also do the job, right? So I could put glass here, or I could just put a lower half slab there. Again, if you put an upper half slab, they can jump around, but more importantly, mobs can spawn on top of this, right? So you want a lower half, or a glass block. It has to be transparent, physical block, or a lower half slab. Now, again, one other thing to keep in mind, kind of the last little detail to think of, Notice how my villagers are completely barred off from any kind of physical contact with these beds. They cannot reach the bed, they cannot interact with the beds, even though they're this close. They are blocked by panes and glass blocks. If you allow your villagers to be able to get to your bed, if they are able to sleep in the bed, obviously they can crawl out of your little villager chamber and they can hop over these walls maybe and get into the villager thing, into the kill trap, and they'll die. So clearly that's not good. Now, that's pretty much all I really have to say for this. It's not obviously the most efficient farm ever designed, but as far as PS4 mechanics go nowadays, this is the best that I can come up with, the most efficient that I can come up with. And I mean, the rates are actually kind of decent considering the new mechanics. Again, it's not great. This one did produce 51 in an hour, but consider this one an outlier. Like, see 32 and think that's more reasonable. See 43 and think like, oh, that's really good. That's an upper end. And then see like 26 in 30 minutes. Say, okay, well, that's about 42, so that's normal. 20, that's about 40 in an hour. Okay, that's good. 1 hour, 36. Okay, that's reasonable. So when you see 51, don't think, oh, I can get 51 ingots an hour. Think, well, that was a really weird occurrence. That's an outlier. That's not something that you should count on. It's not something you should expect. My expectation for, that I would give to you guys, I would tell you, expect 30 iron and hope for more, right? In the meantime, again, if you guys want to see me do an actual block-by-block tutorial, I will do my best to kind of get through that. Again, it'll be a very long video. I'll probably trim out bits and pieces here and there. But again, for the most part, it's just building a platform and knowing how big the platform needs to be and where your beds are. Actually, one quick detail about how I actually arranged these beds. It's not particularly convoluted or hard to understand, but you do have to do it from the top layer down to get it there in the same arrangement. Now let's say, if these are my two spawning surfaces, right? This is, again, 1, 2, 3.5 blocks below. So ideally, well, not ideally, for these two spawning surfaces to both spawn golems, I would need my beds to be right here, right? They would need to be on this level as my central layer of beds, right? So that's the key word there. It would need to be my middle layer of beds would need to be at this height. So realistically, I would need to go one up and say, okay, well, I'll do 6 beds just as a demonstration. I did like 4 up there, as you can see earlier. If I were to take my beds, I don't know if white beds would be a good idea for this, because I'm using white blocks, but if I were to use, I'd place 3 beds here, I'd go below, I'd delete these blocks, I'd place 3 beds here, and this would be the middle layer that I actually want my golems to spawn around, and then again, place another layer of blocks here, and delete them, right? Place my beds, and then I have my 3 layers of beds. This will be my middle layer that actually spawns my golems. These 2 will just serve to fill out the remainder of the 21 beds, and as long as all 9 of these beds are occupied, the vertical center of my golem spawner will be on this layer, right at the layer, like between the feet of the bed. It wouldn't be the bed itself, again, I said this earlier, but it would be this little gap, like right between these 2 blocks. This little line right here would become the vertical center in this arrangement. So that's really, it's not particularly a tricky thing to come up with. Oh, golems. Yeah, I mean, if you want me to do a tutorial, just leave some comments. If you guys have any other comments, suggestions, improvements, if you've tried this in your world and you're having difficulty or if you're experiencing different rates, feel free to contact me, because I would love to troubleshoot this so I never have to worry about it again. In the meantime, this is Badass Mother Prussia, signing out.